Right, Richard, before we go to the city where you went next, I'm just interested because even when I was going up to see bands and stuff, that sort of part of Hackney, I think sort of around there was like the Murder Mile, wasn't it? So, considering your background, it must have been quite a culture shock.
It was. It was a culture shock in a sense, but I'd been slightly prepared for it by working down in Burdett Road, after whom I imagine that rather good novice hurdler of James Owen is named. I've been slightly prepared for it by working down there because it very much taught me that if you have to treat people with respect. You have to. I'm a great believer that you want to get on with people in life, and I think Ladbrokes really taught me to do that. I think it also slightly taught me that if you can suss what other people want before they can suss what you want, it probably helps too. But it was, there were some very hairy times in there. I remember one day when we ran out of money, because Ladbrokes shops didn't carry much of a cash float, and if you had a bad day, the punters had to come back the following day when you'd been to the bank. And there was one particular day we ran out of money in the shop, and a lot of the punters in there, all they were really interested in was they wanted to just get one over on you. In the old days when you were getting the commentary through the blower, you'd suddenly hear Hares Running Hackney, and 20 Rastafarians would descend on the till, hurling betting slips, some with cash, some without, half of them written very dodgily, so that the 1108 would just be going off, and they'd have written 1126, and I mean so it was an incredible place to learn to get on with people. Because frankly, if I didn't get on with people, it really could have been quite tricky. But it was a phenomenal experience. I absolutely loved it.
Okay, so you went from the Murder Mile to the Square Mile. So what happened?
Nepotism. I left Ladbrokes essentially because the one thing I wanted to do was the one thing that an awful lot of other people wanted to do, and that was to get on the racecourse for them. And that's a very, Ladbrokes had in those days, God, I don't know how many shops they would have had, 1,500 probably. There were a lot of people who wanted to get on the racecourse. That was never really going to happen, I don't think, certainly at that age. I was 22, 23 maybe. It wasn't going to happen. So I thought it's probably time to move on. And I had my first girlfriend, her father ran a fund management business in the city. I always got on incredibly well with him. She chucked me and not the other way around. So I always remained relatively in favour. And he always said, if you think about moving towards the city, give me a ring. So I did, unashamedly. So I started working in the city in 1985.
So that was the era of the yuppies and Porsches.
Yeah, I never had one of those. But yeah, it was great fun. And to some extent, I went into sales. I used to run around the country selling our investment funds to stockbrokers and financial advisors and so on and so forth. And in many respects, it was the same game. It was getting on with people and forging relationships with people. And I remember a guy I used to work with there saying to me one day, it doesn't matter whether you're selling pork pies, carpet tiles, or unit trusts, people will always buy people first. And I think that's true in any walk of life. And so I've always tried to get on with people. I met a couple of people it was a business firm called Henderson. So I worked there for 3.5 years, and then a group of 4 of us moved across to work for another fund management business where we were for, I suppose, 5 years. And then we started our own business in 1993, and I was there, until after I finished walking the courses, so well over 20 years. But I moved from sales into trading. I ran the trading desk for them for 23 years.
And did you, I assume you continued your interest in horse racing and betting
Absolutely.
while that was going along?
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. But partly, actually, through my old man, who, as I say, was not a punter. Since the early 1960s, he had, at the major race meeting of the day, he had written down in a little notebook which horse he thought would win each race and work out what he would make or lose to an each way 50p stake on the tote, or back in 1965, probably an each way sixpence on the tote. And he did this literally every single day from 1960 until the day he died, practically. And for the last 15 years that we used to have a competition against each other over the course of the season, and it was a source of just massive enjoyment and pleasure and amusement. I remember when I was leading, I think in the 16th year, I was leading 8-7. And in October, we're coming towards the end of the flat season, the competition's very close. And on a Saturday, I'd rung him up and find out what he'd selected. And the first flat race of the afternoon, he picked a 20-1 winner that paid £38 on the tote, something never changed. And he, that morning, after I'd spoken to him, had a brain hemorrhage. And he always told the story that the reason I was most worried about him not pulling through was that actually that 20-1 winner moved him ahead in the competition with me, which would have meant that if he had croaked, it would have been 8-all. As it happened, he survived, and I went on to win that season to establish a 9-7 lead. But yeah, we talked about racing a lot, and my interest in it never ever waned for a moment.
Was his not being a punter due to any sort of beliefs, or was it just someone he was never interested in?
He was no mug, my father, and I think when you're sitting, picking horses every single day, and having a theoretical P&L, and over the course of 25 years he did it. I think he had one profitable season. So no, he was never a gambler.
And you mentioned that he had a brain hemorrhage, but it was your dad's sad death from pancreatic cancer that prompted you to take the mammoth walking challenge.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, when he died, I'd just got to the age of 50, or I was just about 50, and I'd done nothing in my life for charity beyond growing the most pathetic moustache you've ever seen in your life. It was just horrendous. And I just always, I felt that just once in my life I needed to do something that would potentially make a reasonable difference to, and it happened to coincide with a time that at work I was getting quite bored, quite restless of increased regulation. That makes it sound like I was a cheat, which I wasn't, but it was regulation that was intrusive, and it was spoiling the joy of the job.
Sounds familiar.
It does, doesn't it? Absolutely, I was going to say. So I managed to. I'd come. I remember a great mate of mine who I talked to in the city rang me up one day and said, "Farks, I went to Great Leys yesterday. So I've been to every racecourse in Great Britain." And I thought, bloody hell, that's impressive. And immediately got the list out and ticked off the ones I've been to. And I think I've been to 28. And I sort of thought then, I wonder if I could do something that involved me going to every racecourse in Britain as a charity project. And I thought, well, no one is going to sponsor me to go racing at every course in Britain, because everyone knows it's really, there's nothing made me happier, and there's no great effort involved. So then I thought, well, I can't ride a horse, obviously, because I've never ridden. I can't ride a bike because my left knee doesn't like that angle of flex of riding a bike. And I thought, well, maybe I could walk. I mean, walking's not too energetic. So I sort of hummed and hawed about it. And then I did the sensible thing that so many people do, inevitably, of all the reasons why I shouldn't do it. Like, I've got a family, I've got a job, I've got, just so many reasons not to do it. So I sort of put it to one side, really, for a bit. And I guess the ultimate catalyst really was John Hills, who I didn't know him at all well. I knew him well enough to sort of nod across a paddock. But he had kids about the same age as mine. A couple of them had been to the same school that my daughters were at. And when he died of pancreatic cancer, I thought, right, okay. Racing has been hit very hard by pancreatic cancer. John Hills, Desi Hughes, Tristram Ricketts around the BHA, Robert Sangster. A lot of people have been impacted by it. I thought, particularly with John Hills, because everybody loved John Hills. He was a great character, loved life, lived it pretty hard, pretty fast, loved a glass of red. I thought perhaps racing will really get behind this if I do this for for pancreatic cancer. And I wanted to do it for a racing charity as well, because again, I thought that would draw more people in. And Racing Welfare, certainly in those days, was very much the poor relation of the IJF. Everybody knew about the IJF and the Christmas cards and this, that and the other. And, you know, it's never is it truer than it is right now how important the IJF is and the amazing work that they do. Racing Welfare effectively looks after everybody else in racing. Everybody, all the unsung, all the stable lads, the stud hands, the box drivers, the starting stalls handlers, the photographers, you name it, everybody. And I just felt that they didn't have the profile, they didn't have anywhere near the resources, and yet they had a massive, massive, effective stakeholder base of people that they were going to have, potentially look after. And typically, if a stable lass gets thrown off a horse on the gallops and sustains a really, really bad injury, with the best one in the world, it's not going to get the coverage in the racing press, never mind anywhere else, that, some ghastly, awful, horrific thing like the dreadful accidents happened to Graham Lee. So I decided to do it for Racing Welfare as well.
Okay, now, correct me if my figures are wrong, I've Googled them. 2,910 miles.
Yep.
All the UK's racecourses, and you race £500,000, as we mentioned before, for the two charities. I mean, what were the logistics of that like?
They were significant. Before I started the project, I was acutely aware that there was absolutely no way I could do it off my own back. I was quite lucky that my eldest daughter had just graduated, and she loves her racing. And I managed to persuade her to come and work with me on the project, basically as soon as she left university. There was a huge amount of planning. The race days, because I arrived at each racecourse on the day of a race meeting, which then turned into a fundraiser. So for starters, it was a question of finding days that each of the 60 racecourses could effectively have me. We weren't interested in going when they were doing something for the RNLI or Marie Curie or whatever, because we wanted to be standing on the gate shaking buckets at the end of the day and doing all that. So logistically, it was a huge project, but essentially all I did, I walked and I talked, and my daughter did everything else. She did the social media, she did the branding, she did the PR, she did the marketing, she did the event planning, the liaison with the race courses. She did an unbelievable job, and I could not, and notwithstanding the fact she also dropped me off at the start of every day's walking and picked me up at the end of every day's walking. I could not possibly have done it without her.
So how long did it take you to do?
From flash to bang, I left Newmarket's Rolling Mile in the middle of March, and I to walk to Toaster. That was the first leg, and the last leg I walked back to the Rolling Mile from Huntingdon in April the following year. So I walked on about 195 days of that 13 months. It was brilliant. And
were you sort of holding down the city?
You're
the boss by then. You were working for your own firm by then, weren't you?
I wasn't the boss, but by any stretch. But they very kindly gave me a sabbatical, so they very kindly kept paying me, and I spent, when I was walking or just finished walking, they were happy for me to crack on and do that. And they were brilliant. I couldn't have done it without a lot of people, daughter primarily, but also Lion Trust, who were very, very generous in terms of giving me the time off to do it.